a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy, back at Hometown Commander. We're back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander or commanders in front of us on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. We're in the fourth week of Doctor Who content in the last of the precons. And this week we're talking about the Blast from the Past precon with the fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. This episode is going to be taking the precon and upgrading it as best we can, adding as many other Doctor Who cards as possible, while still sticking to the theme. And then tomorrow's episode will be us taking the deck and building a commander's a Doctor and companion with a bunch of other cards, not trying to stick to this Doctor Who kind of as best restriction as possible. Well, let's talk about the face commanders of the Blast of the Past deck. We have the fourth Doctor, our legendary Time Lord Doctor, 2 and a blue and a green for a 4/4. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and it says once during each of your turns you can play an historic land or cast an historic spell from the top of your library. When we do, we get a food. Okay, so when we get a food, but historic. So we should really quick talk about what are historic spells or permanents. Historic spells are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. We filled our deck with legendary creatures, artifacts, and some sagas. So we almost always can find something off the top. Sarah Jane Smith says whenever we cast an historic spell, we investigate, and this only goes happen once per turn. So when we investigate, we make a clue. That clue for 2 mana can be sacrificed to draw a card, and she has Doctor's Companion. So the goal of the deck is going to be get one or both of them out, preferably probably the fourth Doctor. Obviously, Sarah Jane's going to be easier to get out first, and then the fourth Doctor after, so that we can start playing historic spells and generating value. Again, Sarah Jane Smith will always get us that clue for the first historic spell we cast each turn, whether it's off the top of our library or not. Fourth Doctor will allow us to do that one off the top of our library and get us a food. So I see 2 themes brewing here. We have the historic theme, of course, with all of these things, but we also have this food and clue tokens theme. And so I tried my best to put in enough of a support package as I could for us to take advantage of these artifact tokens that we're making, and so we can still get some good value with them. Mana base, just like a lot of the decks in the series so far, all we really added, in this case I added the tri-land, since we're in 3 colors. I thought it was important because of our cards that care about whether we have something of a certain type in our hand, like Fortified Village. If we have this in our hand, we could use that. Otherwise, our check lands that we added that come in, if we have either the land types that come in untapped, of course, can see the Triumph and allow us to have them come in untap. We added Plausive Hero since there's so many legendary creatures. This can tap for mana of any color to spend a legendary spell, or tap of any color among legendary permanents you control. So it kind of does both, and that will be helpful to us. Getting up into the enchantments, you could see almost all of them are going to be historic, but all of them are kind of cool. And Unearthly Child says 1, 2, and 3 reveal the top cards of our library, and 2 reveal a Doctor or cards with Doctor's Companion or a vehicle. Put it into our hand and put the rest on the bottom. We were playing a lot of Doctors, a lot of Doctor's Companions, and I believe only 1 vehicle in the TARDIS. So the Unearthly Child is going to find a lot of these legendary permanents that we care about and put them in our hand. City of Death is a really fun card, and it's getting talked about a lot outside of this precon. On the first one, we're going to make a treasure, and then on the next 5 sagas, we create a token that's a copy of a target non-saga token we control. So this allows us to make a lot of things, whether it's more treasures, whether it's more clues or foods, whether it's token copies of other things. I think the City of Death can go get us a lot of value depending on what we choose to use it for. I added a background, and that is Clan Crafter, a 2 mana background that says commander creatures you own have 2 sacrifice an artifact, put a counter on this creature, and draw. What I like about Clan Crafter in this deck is this is actually going to apply to both of our commanders, both the 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. Both of them will be able to use this ability and allow us to turn our clues into a +1/+1 counter and drawing a card, or turn our foods into a +1/+1 counter and drawing a card if we want to do that, if we don't have any other effects to use them for. I think it will come important because it will allow us to just draw some cards. And remember, with the 4th Doctor out, we can see exactly what's on top. If we don't want to cast it, we could draw it and try to find something else. Day of Destiny, which got its reprint in the deck, gives all of our legendary creatures +2/+2, and again, we have a lot of them in the deck. So this is great, just going to all buff them up if we need to start attacking. Feldar Retreat says whenever a land comes in, we can either make a cat, beast, creature token, or we put a counter on each creature we control and they gain vigilance. And that's a pretty cool ability because then all of our creatures can start attacking and stay back to block. And Feldar Retreat just makes so much value over the course of the game the earlier we see it. Bringing in that Flowering of the White Tree from Lord of the Rings, just because it, number one, is legendary itself, so it's going to automatically count. It's going to count for historic that way. And two, it gives all of our legendary creatures +2/+1 in Ward 1. And then it gives all of our other creatures +1/+1. So for 2 white mana, it is an historic permanent, so it will count for all of those. And then it is just going to buff our board and protect it a little bit. Mechanized Production seems like an interesting win con here. We enchant artifact we control. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of the enchanted artifact. Then if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, you win the game. So most people, when they look right at Mechanized Production, they think, oh, I need to put this on the artifact I expect to have 8 or more of. And that's true. You could and you should do that. But you don't have to necessarily. If I'm making enough clues, let's say I'm doing this every turn, I'm making enough food and clues every turn, the card doesn't care whether the artifact that it's attached to is the one that has 8 or more. It just cares that one of them has 8 or more, and then you will win the game on your upkeep. Again, just a cheeky way to help win, and if we have so many of these cards, why not take advantage of them? Michiko's Reign of Truth was a card that I hadn't thought about, but when I started realizing how many of the cards, especially in this precon, make artifact tokens or make things, Michiko's felt right. So on the top 2 of the saga, and it also is it's a saga, so it's also historic in itself, but target creature gets +1/+1 until end turn for each artifact or enchantment we control. Should be a good amount, especially in the mid to late game. And then on the 3rd, we exile it and bring it back in as an enchantment creature that gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment we control. I like this. It's going to buff up our creatures on the first 2. It is historic, so we can play it for that value. And then once it flips over, it just becomes a big creature. Mirari's Way can help us add extra mana every time a land gets tapped and just buff our whole board. And then we get into a couple more sagas. Again, all of our sagas are historic, remember, because of the way that historic is defined. So all of these are going to be able to be played off the top or get us a clue with Sarah Jane Smith. Caves of Andronazi, we put 2 stun counters on each of up to 2 target tapped creatures. And it says for each non-saga permanent, choose a counter on it. You may put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. So if we're spreading +1/+1 counters or other things around, we can do that. Otherwise, we continue to put stun counters on those creatures. And then on 4, we search our library for a doctor card and put it into our hands. So we can keep a couple creatures locked down and then get a doctor as a payoff at the end. We're bringing the 11th hour over from the Time We Want Me deck. It says search your library for a doctor, reveal it, put it into your hand, the shuffle. And there's a couple doctors we actually really liked for this deck. We create a food and a 1/1 human creature token with doctors, cost 1 less to cast. And on 3, we create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's a legendary alien named Prisoner Zero. This will actually allow us to get another copy of any of our legendary creatures because it has a different name. So if we want to copy our commander or one of our other legendary creatures, we could do that because its name is Prisoner Zero and not the name of that original legendary creature. Trial of Time Lord. On the first 3, we get to exile target non-token creature and opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. And then on the 4th one, it says, starting with you, each player votes for innocent or guilty. If guilty gets more vote, the owner of each card puts that card on the bottom of their library. So if enough people vote innocent, no one gets them back. But if enough people vote guilty, they put them on the bottom. So they're almost always going to get, not brought back to the battlefield. They're just going to get put back on the bottom. But again, people have to want to put them back on the bottom, and we might even be able to just completely exile some things. And the last is War of the Last Alliance from the Lord of the Rings set. We search our library for a legendary creature, reveal and put it to our hand on the first 2, and then on the 3rd one, creatures get double strike until end of turn the ring tempts us. So just a little bit of search for more of our historic creatures, and then double strike for a whole board on the last one, which could become pretty darn important. As far as our artifacts go, we'll talk about the mana rocks first, and then we'll talk about the non-mana artifacts second. We have Arcane Signet, pretty much a commander staple at this point for adding mana. We're trying out 500-year diary. It comes in tapped, and we add a blue for each clue we control, which again we're making hopefully every turn with Sarah Jane. And then we can pay 2 to sacrifice it to draw a card. Relic of Legends comes in. It adds a mana of any color, but we can tap and untap legendary creature we control to add a mana of any color. And the cool part about that ability is because you're tapping it for the purpose of this card's ability and not that creature. Even creatures that came in this turn can get tapped. A Relic of Legends, which makes it really important. Soul Ring, our other commander staple, tap it for 2 colorless mana every turn. Sonic Screwdriver, our of course the iconic piece for the Doctor, taps for a mana of any color. 1 in a tap it can tap a tapped artifact, and then 2 and tap it to scry 1, and 3 and tap it to make a creature unblockable, which isn't a bad ability sometimes depending on what we have on board. The TARDIS, of course, there's nowhere the Doctor can go without the TARDIS. Crews for 2, and I do believe every Doctor in the deck can crew it. It says when the TARDIS attacks, if you control a Time Lord, the next spell you cast this turn has Cascade, and you may Planeswalk. Again, Cascade can be really fun because it can get us an extra spell for our value. And then we're playing the 2 Talismans that came in this deck. I didn't think we needed the third one because we're going to talk about some of the ramp that we have as we get up in to our spells. As we get into our spells, we need a little bit of removal, so we're playing Beast Within, Generous Gift, Reality Shift, and Sword to Plowshares. Beast Within and Generous Gift do the same thing. They can destroy any permanent, and that permanent's controller gets a 3/3. This can hit lands, anything, which is nice. Reality Shift exiles a creature, and their opponent, and that permanent's controller, owner. A controller, manifests the top card, and then Swords to Plowshares just exiles, and they gain life equal to its power. Here we go, a good suite of removal that can hit almost anything. Growth Spiral for some ramp. We draw a card and we can put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. Verse the Polarity, a card that I'm definitely warming up on a lot because it's really versatile. We choose one of the following: counter all other spells, switch each power and toughness, creature's power and toughness to end a turn, or creatures can't block this turn. I like this for 2 reasons. If your opponent's going a big battle on the stack, or they start doing some crazy things on the stack, you can counter all other spells that are on the stack. This can definitely hose some decks that are playing things like Mystic's Mastery or something like that. You can just do this at the end, counter everything that's on the stack, or just pave the way for all of our legendary creatures to hit it for damage. And then we're playing Time Lord Regeneration. Until end of turn, target Time Lord you control gains when this creature dies. Reveal cards on the top until you hit another Time Lord, put it on the battlefield, and put the rest on the bottom. So if one of our Doctors attacks in and we think and it gets blocked and it's going to die in combat, just Time Lord's Generation, it'll go away, but we'll get another one no matter what off the top. Cultivate, Explore, Farseek, and Rampant Growth for that ramp. Cultivate, Farseek, you're going to go both get basic lands. Explore just does a very similar thing to Growth Spiral, where we draw a card and we can play an additional land. And then Farseek can go get a Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain and put it on the battlefield tapped. This is in here, well, 1, because we have basic lands of all of those types, but 2, before our Triumph, because our Triumph does have 3 types, so we can go get it with Farseek. Sometimes I feel like we're going to need an extra punch, and I think something like Karn's Temporal Sundering and Twice Upon a Time are going to help us do that. Karn's Temporal Sundering is a legendary sorcery, so we do need to have a legendary creature when we cast it. Target player takes an extra turn after this one, and we return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This is just going to help us build up our board even more, and maybe take an extra turn, take an extra attack to help hurt our opponents. Twice Upon a Time is kind of fun for 3 mana. We go get a Doctor and put it into our hand on the adventure side. And then on the regular side, we can only cast if we have 2 or more Doctors, and we take an extra turn after this one. So again, just because I'm assuming as we build up our historic permanents and our creatures, as we buff them with our cards, we're going to probably need a combat or 2 to get there. Traverse Eternity, draw cards equal to the highest mana among historic permanents you control. Hopefully this refills our hand, gets us more cards. But the card I think is going to end up shining in our deck a lot, and it's not a very expensive card at the end of the day, is Rise and Shine. This is a 2-mana sorcery that says target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4 counters on it, and it becomes a creature this way. It says put 4/4 +1/+1 counters on each artifact that became a creature this way, and for 6 mana we can make all non-creature artifacts we control into creatures. This is important because we have a ton of foods and clues laying around. We can turn them into creatures for a big attack. Rise and Shine is great for these decks where you make a ton of clues and foods and treasures, because you can just turn them into creatures and hit for a big combat. This is a card that can help us end the game, depending on how many of these guys, how many of these tokens we can create and help end the game that way. Getting into our creatures, it only felt right to try out our favorite assembly worker when it comes to tokens. That's Academy Manufacturer. It says if we would create a clue, food, or treasure, we make 1 of each instead. This is going to allow us to just stack up those tokens and, again, pay off that Rise and Shine if we can get there, or some of our other effects we have. and just make sure we're always going to have enough of them on hand. But what Academy Magic actually mainly will do is the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith will actually give us treasures as well as food and clues, and that'll help us with extra mana. Ace Fearless Rebel says whenever it attacks, you may sack an artifact, which we're going to have plenty laying around. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then it fights up to one target creature defending player controls. So Ace can get bigger and bigger as it attacks, as we sacrifice the clues and food we have laying around. Adric Mathematical Genius, for 2 and a blue, we can copy target activated or triggered ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. This seems kind of important, because we can copy some other abilities we have if need be. Or for 1 and a blue, we can counter target activated or triggered abilities. So I like it because it kind of gives us a little bit of flexibility. We can copy our own, and we can counter our opponents if we want to. Alistair the Brigadier, a 4-mana 3/3 that says whenever we cast an historic spell, we get a 1/1 soldier. And whenever it attacks, we can pay 8. If we do, creatures we control get +X/+X, where X is the number of historic permanents you control. Yes, paying 8 is a really big payoff, and it may be tough to get there, but I feel like the 1/1 should add up over time. Of course, if we see Alistair really late, it may not be as useful. But again, I think it's worth trying, as we're going to be playing a lot of these historic permanents. Astrid Peth, 2 mana, 2/2. It says when it enters the battlefield, we make a food. And then whenever we sacrifice a clue or food, it explores. So you look at the top card, put that card in your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, we can put it back on top or into the graveyard, and she gets a +1/+1 counter. Again, we have the foods coming in. When she comes in, we have foods and clues laying around that we're going to sacrifice, which could make her bigger and make her into a better attack. We have Barbara Wright, which says sagas you control have a read ahead, meaning we can choose what mode we want our sagas to start on, and it is a Doctor's Companion. But again, at the end of the day, it is an historic permanent for 2 mana. And again, we're playing enough sagas that maybe we wouldn't want to start them on 1, although most of them I think we do. Displaced Dinosaur says whenever a historic permanent enters the battlefield under control, it becomes a 7/7 dinosaur creature into its other type. This is going to kind of help us on that same plan as Rise and Shine, where once we get the displaced dinosaurs out, any of those clues, foods, or anything like that are just going to come in as 7/7s, and that's going to help us, push towards that eventual goal of ending the game. Jahira, Friend of the Forest, seems like a bang-on card for this. Tokens we control have added green mana, so all of our foods and clues are going to start tapping for green mana, which is going to help us as we're accumulating those, and they become basically mana rocks for us. Jimmy McCrimmins has Trample, and whenever we cast an historic spell, it gets +X/+X till in turn where X is that spell's mana value. This could get really good because it could get bigger and bigger and start hitting hard in combat, which is always going to be helpful. K9 Mark 1 seems like a really fun card for this deck. It says as long as it's untapped, other legendary creatures you control have Ward 1, which can hopefully protect them just a little bit. And for 1 and a blue, tapped target legendary creature can't be blocked this turn. So there's a lot of different creatures we can get in. Of course, Jamie gets bumped, Ace gets bumped. There's a lot of creatures we could potentially get in with K9 for free by just paying that 2 mana. Lonus Cryptozoologist is in here because one of our commanders is making clues. And Lonus is, of course, one of our most popular clue commanders. This is whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield, we investigate, make that clue. Tap, sacrifice X clues. Target opponent reveals the top X cards of their library. You may put a non-land permanent with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield under your control, and they put the rest on the bottom. So what Lonus is just going to do is allow us to take all these clues that we have, and we don't want to use them for anything else, and start turning them into permanents from our opponent's libraries and get some value. Well, we added a couple Lord of the Rings cards because there was some, of course, Lord of the Rings cards that cared so much about food and other tokens that we wanted to take advantage. The first is Mary, Warden of Isengard. It partners with Pippin, but of course Pippin's not in these colors, so we're not playing Pippin. But it says whenever one of our artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, we'll create a 1/1 soldier with lifelink. So again, it's historic, so we can get our triggers off of it. But again, every turn we're going to end up making one somehow, and that's just going to turn into a 1/1. Nissa of Traken, you have no maximum hand size, and whenever Nissa attacks, we sacrifice X artifacts. When you do, tap up to X target creatures and we draw X cards. This can be really good because if we have, again, those extra foods or clues laying around, sack them, tap down our opponent's blockers, draw some cards, and get in for some damage. Peregrine Took says whenever one or more tokens will be created, make that plus an additional food, and we can sack 3 foods to draw a card. I like this because we're going to end up having the foods laying around. We can't always use them. Peregrine Took will help us take them and turn them into card draw. Perry Brown, first historic spell you cast each turn has Convoke, meaning we can tap creatures to pay for one color of that creature's color type, and that's pretty good because then we can start tapping our creatures to help us cast spells. Rosie Cotton of South Lane, when she comes in, we make a food, and then whenever we make a token, we put a counter on a creature other than Rosie, and that's pretty good because again we can start buffing up our creatures and play into that route if we want to. But again, just you'd be surprised how many tokens you make and how quickly Rosie can just start putting counters on everything. We're playing Samwise Gamgee. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield, we create a food, and we can sack 3 foods to bring a historic card from our graveyard back to our hand. This is good because we can recycle our sagas. We can bring our creatures back that died. I like this card a lot, and for 2 mana, it feels really worth it. Susan Foreman, 2 mana for a creatures that if you'd Planeswalk, instead look at the top 2 cards of the planar deck, put 1 on the bottom, and then Planeswalk, and we just add a green. Again, it's in here to just add a green. If we are playing the Plane Chase, it certainly helps with that. But again, it's just a historic permanent that helps tap for mana. Tegan Javanka, whenever we attack, target attacking historic creature gets +1/+1 and indestructible on the turn. This is going to help us get some good attacks into our opponents. And it's any historic creature. So legendary artifact, it doesn't matter. It could even be her. So I like it as a good ability, and it's going to help protect some of the creatures that we're trying to kind of buff up and attack with. The 8th Doctor, when it enters, we mill 3, and once during our turn, we can play an historic land or cast an historic permanent from our graveyard. If we do, it gains. If this permanent will leave the battlefield, exile it. So we can get things back from our graveyard once they die or get discarded, and cast them back, which is pretty helpful. The 5th Doctor, at the beginning of your end step, we put a counter on each creature you control that didn't attack or enter the battlefield this turn, they untap. So if we're tapping our things for other abilities, or tapping them for Jaheira or any matter of other things, or any of the ways we could tap our creatures as long as they didn't attack, they're going to untap, and that's pretty cool. The 1st Doctor is going to automatically go get the TARDIS from our deck or graveyard and put it into our hand. And it says whenever you cast a spell with Cascade, the Doctor can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or artifact. So obviously the TARDIS makes us our next spell we cast with Cascade after it deals damage to a player. So of course the first Doctor is gonna get the TARDIS. It has his only right for the lore, crew it, start attacking with it, and casting some spells with Cascade. Second Doctor says that all players don't have maximum hand size. In the beginning of our end step, each player may draw a card. Each opponent who does can't attack you or permanents you control until your next turn. So we can spread the love with some card draw, but if we do, they can't attack us. The 7th Doctor is kind of a fun and interesting card, and it's going to help play into all these artifacts we have. It says whenever it attacks, choose a card in your hand. Defending player guesses whether that mana value is greater than the number of artifacts you control. If they guess wrong, you cast without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast a spell this way, we investigate. Now, we do not have to cast it if they're wrong, but we can. And I think that can lead to a lot of fun. The Professor did a really good job showing this off on Shuffle Up and Play with his 7th Doctor deck, and showing that sometimes you just don't want to cast it, you just want to get the clue. The 6th Doctor, whenever you cast a historic spell, copy it, except its copy isn't legendary, and this only happens once per turn. This is a really fun ability, because we can start getting double copies of these things, double triggers, double things happening, and that feels pretty darn good. And then the 3rd Doctor, our final creature, it gets +1/+1 for each non-creature token you control, and when it enters the battlefield, create your choice of a clue, a food, or a treasure. 3rd Doctor is just going to get bigger and bigger for the more of these we have, so it feels like an obvious attacker maybe for K9 to make unblockable, or just to start threatening our opponents with that trample that it has. But let me know, what do you guys think of my upgrade for Blast for the Past down in the comments. I had some fun upgrading this precon. It's kind of an interesting precon. And tomorrow we're actually going to be looking at the 6th Doctor and having some fun copying historic spells. If you're interested in that, that'll be tomorrow's video. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Deck list in the description as always, and I will catch you guys next time.